This video is sponsored by Flexispot. I've been using their C7 Max ergonomic chair recently, and I'll be sharing my thoughts on it shortly. Dark Souls 3 is a comedy. Yes, you heard that right. And at the heart of this comedy lies a narrative that explores cycles. Not as a triumph of rebirth, but as a solemn reminder of entropy and the inevitability of decay. The game's story, steeped in the mythos of the Souls series, revolves around the Age of Fire, a recurring epoch sustained by the rekindling of the first flame. This act of rekindling is not one of rejuvenation, but of postponement. It temporarily delays the onset of the Age of Dark, only for the flame to grow weaker and the world more fragile with each cycle. This diminishing return of effort and sacrifice underscores the game's central theme, that all cycles, no matter how noble their intent, eventually erode into hollow repetition. And right now you may be wondering how exactly a story like this is actually a comedy. I'll explain what I mean in just a minute. The world of Lothric is a microcosm of this narrative, its very existence shaped by the fading flame. Unlike the vibrant and thriving landscapes of earlier cycles, Lothric is a patchwork of dying legacies. Its castles crumble, its fields lie fallow, and its inhabitants languish as shadows of their former selves. This erosion isn't confined to the physical world we move through, it is deeply ingrained in the game's characters and their arcs. The Lords of Cinder, once celebrated champions who kindled the flame in ages past, now embody the futility of perpetuating a cycle that no longer holds meaning. Characters like Ludleth of Corland serve as scholars of this cycle, understanding its inevitability but continuing to participate out of duty. Others, such as Prince Lothric, outright reject their role, refusing to rekindle the flame and allowing the rot to spread unchecked. As players, we assume the role of the unkindled, a being resurrected not out of glory, but out of failure, neither fully alive nor completely dead. Our quest to gather the Lords of Cinder and return them to their thrones is less about salvation and more about clinging to a past that has long since lost its brilliance. As the story unfolds, the pointlessness of this endeavor becomes increasingly clear. Every success, every rekindling is ultimately a momentary reprieve, and the Age of Fire grows shorter with each cycle. This narrative construct does more than depict a world in decline. It serves as a poignant reflection on the act of creation itself. The rekindling of the flame, a gesture meant to restore vitality to the world, becomes a hollow exercise when performed endlessly. From Software used this narrative loop to draw a parallel between the nature of the game world and the challenges of supporting a long-running creative endeavor like the Souls series, which found itself in a similar predicament by the time of Dark Souls 3. How does one preserve the essence of creativity when repetition and expectation threaten to erode it? Inside by Bo Burnham is a comedy special that I would argue transcends its medium, evolving into a raw exploration of artistic burnout, self-doubt, and the isolating nature of creativity. Bo, confined to a single room for the duration of the special, constructs a narrative where the process of creating art becomes the art itself. Through a combination of songs, skits, and quiet moments of reflection, Inside examines the toll of the creative process and the inevitable weariness that accompanies it. The special begins with light-hearted performances such as content and comedy, poking fun at the expectations placed upon artists. But the tone quickly grows darker, reflecting the mounting frustration and exhaustion of creation in isolation. The room, Bo's self-imposed creative prison, becomes both a literal and symbolic representation of the barriers that artists face, where the demands of production clash with the limitations of mental and physical space. Much like the world of Dark Souls 3, the repetition of cycles leads to inevitable decay, and Inside portrays how the cyclical nature of creation can erode the artist's spirit and the spaces in which they create. And whether you're a creator, a gamer, or you simply spend a lot of time at your desk every day, then you should check out the sponsor of today's video, the Flexispot C7 Max. I've been using the C7 Max for the past few weeks, and it's been an absolute game changer. The thing I love most about this chair is the adjustability of pretty much everything on it. From tilting the headrest to changing the seat depth, and not just moving the lumbar support itself, but the entire backrest height as well. But Flexispot didn't stop there, as the C7 Max not only adjusts to fit you perfectly, but was also designed to be extra comfortable and supportive. There's a ridiculously soft and supportive latex seat cushion with memory foam, so I can sit for up to 6 hours at a time totally comfortably. And when I'm ready to kick back and relax, all I have to do is pop out the footrest and I'm set for an extra long and extra comfy gaming session at my desk. On top of all of this, Flexispot offers a 30-day return policy so you can try out the chair completely risk-free. But they are so confident you'll love it that they also include a 10-year warranty. Pick one up for yourself by heading over to the link in the description and pinned comment and using the code C730 to get $30 off your order. Now, back to the video. Dark Souls 3 is not only a continuation of its predecessors, but, much like Inside, also a deeply introspective work that acknowledges and critiques its own legacy. Through its self-referential design, the game embraces the cyclical nature of its narrative, while offering a commentary on the challenges of maintaining creativity over time. Every aspect of the game, from its level design and mechanics to its narrative callbacks, functions as both homage and a meditation on repetition. This self-referentiality is most evident in the return to Anor Londo, an iconic location from the first Dark Souls. In Dark Souls 3, however, Anor Londo is not presented in its former glory, but as a shadow of itself, cloaked in darkness and decay. The grandeur and sheer spectacle that once defined it has faded, truly showing the diminishing returns of this over-perpetuated age of fire. This return is not just a nostalgic nod to longtime fans, it is a deliberate commentary on the erosion of meaning over time. By revisiting this location, players are forced to confront the weight of the series' legacy and the burden of expectations placed on both the game and its creators. The game also brings back familiar mechanics, enemies, and NPC types, but with subtle changes that reflect this passage of time. Foes like the Abyss Watchers or the Old Demon King echo their earlier counterparts, but they're more fragmented. Their movements are altered or their forms corrupted. This thematic continuity extends to the gameplay itself, which retains the hallmark features of the series: meticulous combat, punishing difficulty, and interconnected level design, while incorporating elements that subtly highlight the weariness of endless repetition. The lack of significant mechanical innovation, though a critique I have seen leveled at Dark Souls 3, is itself a narrative device. By presenting players with a familiar yet fatigued experience, the game immerses them in the same sense of creative exhaustion that permeates its world. The meta-commentary deepens as you progress further. The act of playing Dark Souls 3 often feels like a ritual, a series of trials that must be repeated, deaths that must be endured, and bonfires that must be rekindled, however close they may be to each other. For veteran players, the echoes of previous titles are impossible to ignore. The same patterns of exploration, combat, and progression emerge, but they are tinged with this sense of finality. And I believe it was intentionally designed this way to directly mirror the narrative's cyclical nature, drawing players into this reflective experience that questions the value and cost of repetition. From Software's decision to make Dark Souls 3 a culmination rather than a reinvention is key to its self-referentiality. Unlike the bold departures of Bloodborne or the innovations of Sekiro, Dark Souls 3 leans into its history, deliberately repeating or reinterpreting elements from earlier games. And it works. On the surface, players engage with a really high quality, albeit familiar experience, and beneath that, they grapple with the themes of stagnation and exhaustion that arise from cycles of creation. Dark Souls 3 uses its design to offer both closure and critique. It acknowledges the brilliance of what came before, while confronting the impossibility of endlessly rekindling the same fire. Likewise, Inside is a masterclass in self-referentiality, using its very structure and content to reflect on the process of creating art under the pressure of audience expectation. From the outset, Bo acknowledges the artifice of his performance, repeatedly breaking the fourth wall to remind viewers that they are watching a constructed work. This allows him to turn the lens inward, examining not only the themes of the special, but also highlight his role as its creator. And in doing so, Inside transforms into a very personal self-examination on the artist's relationship with their work, their audience, and themselves. Throughout the special, there are many moments that explore the tension between authenticity and performance. Songs like How the World Works juxtapose innocent melodies with biting critiques that are as cynical as they are relevant even years later. Bo even reacts to his own work within the special in the reaction to my reaction scene, where he watches his previous videos in an endless loop. Sounds familiar. There's absolutely humor in these moments, but there's also a sense of hopelessness, as Bo wrestles with the idea that no level of self-awareness can free him from the pressures of creation. There's an audience behind the camera lens, seated right next to their expectations. It's in a lot of the late special performances that Bo addresses the weight of that audience expectation and the performative nature of his art. The lighting, camera angles, and sound design work together to create something that remains beautiful not in spite of, but in part due to how it emphasizes the disconnect between an artist's internal struggles and the external demands placed upon them. While there are some sections that place more of an emphasis on external happenings in the world at the time he was recording, many of the lyrics also plead for attention while simultaneously lamenting its cost, encapsulating the paradox of being an artist. The desire to not only create, but also connect with others, paired with the burden of constant scrutiny. Just as From Software uses callbacks to their earlier games to critique the limitations of repetition, Bo uses the structure of Inside to question his own artistic process. The special becomes a mirror, reflecting not only his struggles, but also those of any artist caught in the cycle of creation and consumption. And by drawing attention to its own construction, Inside cleverly forces viewers to confront the often hidden labor of creativity, now incorporating the struggle of the artist into the finished product. This isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a narrative device, and it deepens the special's thematic resonance. Bo's ability to critique himself and his work becomes a central element of the story, transforming the special into this unfiltered exploration of the challenges of making art in a world that demands constant innovation. You must keep creating. You must rekindle the fire. The pervasive sense of decay in Dark Souls 3 is not confined to its narrative. It is intricately woven into the game's world design, visuals, and atmosphere. Lothric, the crumbling kingdom where the story unfolds, serves as a physical manifestation of the rot that arises from an endless cycle of creation and destruction. Every corner of this world tells a story of erosion and exhaustion, driving home the idea that even the greatest legacies are eventually reduced to ash. The architecture of Lothric itself is a testament to this decay. Once grand castles and towering cathedrals now barely stand as crumbling ruins, their spires shattered and walls overgrown with moss. From the high wall of Lothric to the Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, and everywhere in between, all the locations in Dark Souls 3 evoke a haunting beauty. No matter where you look, an atmosphere of despair cascades down steps across cobblestones and seeps into the ground beneath your feet. This visual storytelling extends to areas like Smoldering Lake, which is what we once knew as Lost Izalith from Dark Souls 1, though now the fire is fading ever faster. There's also Farron Keep, which many fans have long thought to be the decaying remnants of Darkroot Garden from the first game as well. The world is not just dying, it's rotting. It is decay, spreading both literally and figuratively through every facet of the environment. This world, this game, this piece of art is gasping for air. Characters and enemies further embody this theme. The Lords of Cinder, who once brought glory to the Age of Fire, have themselves succumbed to varying forms of corruption and stagnation. Aldrich, the Devourer of Gods, a hideous amalgamation of the flesh and bones of his victims, a nightmarish representation of gluttony and excess. The Abyss Watchers, locked in a battle amongst themselves after being corrupted by the Abyss. Even the twin princes, Lothric and Lorian, represent a rejection of the cycle, their disillusionment serving as a stark contrast to the so-called heroes of earlier ages. The rekindling of the first flame, an act meant to restore life and light, has become a ritual as hollow as the very character we control. And as we push forward through each battle and every setback, it becomes ever clearer that this is an act of desperation. That even if we were to achieve the goal we initially set out with, the best case we could hope for is to prolong a system bordering on collapse. We're no longer at a point where the story of Dark Souls is simply hidden in item descriptions and behind cryptic lines of dialogue. Decay is no longer just the game's backdrop, but has become the very game itself. It's in Inside's penultimate performance that the creative rot that has plagued Bo throughout the special takes center stage, fully transforming from a source of struggle into the art itself. This is All Eyes on Me. The stirring melody paired with hypnotic visuals captures the artist's descent into exhaustion and self-doubt. Bo's plea not for attention, but some sort of feedback, some input from an audience that he can't directly interact with. Screaming at the camera, desperate and vulnerable, finally and violently pulls back the curtain, showing us the true toll of creating in complete isolation. And yet it's this very vulnerability that elevates the performance, turning the raw emotion of burnout into something as beautiful as it is resonant. All Eyes on Me represents a turning point where the audience is forced to confront the struggles of the artist alongside him. This carefully constructed spectacle with its lighting and sound design becomes a metaphor for the conflict between artistic expression and the weight of audience expectation. The lyrics oscillate between defiance and surrender, and even as the artist resists the demands of performance, he remains entrapped by it. The song becomes a microcosm of the entire special, encapsulating the cyclical struggle of creating, destroying, and rebuilding art. As Bo's performances unravel, the artifice of the special dissolves, leaving the audience with this unfiltered view of the artist's burnout. This is a deconstruction of the creative process very similar to the decay depicted in Dark Souls 3. Just as From Software channels its creative exhaustion into the fabric of its game, Bo uses the collapse of his own mental and emotional state as a canvas for his art. The act of creating Dark Souls 3 was, in many ways, a reflection of the struggles depicted in its own narrative. From Software, burdened by years of innovation and the expectations of an increasingly demanding fanbase, found themselves grappling with the very concepts of entropy and repetition that define the game's lore. This struggle, rather than being a hindrance to them, actually became an integral part of the creative process, transforming the game into a self-referential meditation on the exhaustion of cycles, both in its world and in its making. The themes of rot and decay in Dark Souls 3 are not simply narrative devices, they mirror the weariness of the developers as they sought to conclude the series. Just as the Lords of Cinder struggled to rekindle the flame, prolonging an age that has grown fragile and hollow, From Software faced the challenge of preserving the brilliance of their previous titles while pushing the series towards its inevitable conclusion. Their creative fatigue is reflected in the game's deliberate repetition of motifs, mechanics, and settings from earlier entries. This isn't nostalgic, It's a recognition of the limitations imposed by cycles where innovation becomes increasingly difficult to keep up without succumbing to stagnation. It's most evident in the game's design philosophy. While Dark Souls 3 retains the core mechanics that defined the series, its tone is distinctly different. The atmosphere is heavier, the world more fragmented, and the stakes less about triumph and more about survival. By the time you reach the end, you'll probably feel like you're just about crawling across the finish line. These shifts are emblematic of a studio grappling with its own exhaustion, channeling that weariness into their own game. The repetition of familiar locations and enemies, which could be leveled as a critique, can also be viewed as a deliberate choice, a reflection of how cycles begin to fall apart over time. When you apply this perspective to both Dark Souls 3 and Inside, it becomes evident that they're both a testament in their own right to the idea that art is not simply what results from creative struggle, but is also the process of enduring it. The rot and burnout that permeated the development process of either project didn't weaken them, but instead became a central part of their identities. And by embracing these challenges, From Software and Bo Burnham crafted art that's not just a culmination of their previous works, but also a poignant reflection on the difficulty of sustaining said artistry over time. Watching the closing sequence of Inside, where Bo finally leaves his studio, after the relentless repetition of creating and performing within the confines of his room, this act of stepping into the open represents liberation. Not just from isolation, but from the creative cycle that has defined the special. Presented with a spotlight on himself and a real audience in front of him, the very thing he's been begging for since we hit play on our remotes nearly an hour and a half prior, Bo is scared. He wants to go back inside, but despite his efforts, the door won't budge. It represents what I think Bo, From Software, and many creatives experience when moving on to something new. It's scary, terrifying even, to work on something for so long, not knowing how people will react when they finally see it. And when you put it out into the world, it's understandable to want to take it back inside, to work on it just a little longer, to get rid of all the little imperfections, the things only you would notice. But you can't stay in that room forever. You can't create and iterate on one single piece of art over and over and over. In order for something new to begin, you need to break that cycle. You need to leave that room. You need to let the fire fade. Because when enough time has passed and the camera pulls back, you'll be able to look at what you created like any other member of the audience and smile.
I'll see you when I see you. You can pick a street, I'll meet you on the other side. So long, goodbye. Do I really have to finish? The returns always diminish. Did I say that right? Does anybody